once again, welcome to our Northern Indiana Virtual Solar Workshop. I want to thank our organizers, Amanda Shepard, who's our Senior Manager of Outreach, and Michelle Jones, who's our Outreach Associate. Really appreciate all of their help in the organizing of these 5 workshops that we've done over 2020. I want to also express great gratitude to the City of Goshen, Kosciuszko Chamber of Commerce, St. Joseph Soil and Water Conservation District, and Goshen Brewing Company, who have helped to spread the word for this workshop. So once again, for those who are participating through Zoom, you can ask your questions in the chat, and we'll also monitor those questions that we get through Facebook Live for, again, those who are participating through Facebook Live. Please keep your camera off if you're participating through the Zoom process, and keep your sound muted. If you have technological questions, once again, you can pose those to Amanda Shepard through the private chat. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes setting the context and then turning this over to our main speaker. There are many motivations to go solar. It may be because you want to be energy independent. It may be because you want to improve your stewardship of the environment. It may be for climate action reasons. It may be because you realize that you can have more certainty with respect to your energy costs. But for all those wonderful motivations to go solar, there can be the challenge of cost. But thankfully, the cost of solar has gone down in terms of rooftop solar by more than 65% over the last 10 years. And now we can see elements of solar all across Indiana. We can see that schools such as this one in Hamilton County, we can see it at churches such as this one in Marion County, also in municipal buildings such as this one in Monroe County. And finally, this from LaGrange County, a manufacturing facility. So we see solar being applied to various applications across Indiana. However, solar electricity accounts for less than 1% of total electricity in the state of Indiana, and just a small portion of that 1% is from rooftop solar. But the amazing news is that the National Renewable Energy Lab believes that as much as 40% of America's electricity could come from rooftop solar with the right set of public policies. And that presents the backdrop for this workshop. We're going to be starting off with a presentation by Chris Rohali, who heads Green Alternatives, based in both Kokomo and Flora, Indiana. And he'll be talking about solar technology, financing, and project development. He'll then be followed by Leah Thill, who's with the Michiana Area Council of Governments, and she'll be talking about net metering and incentives for solar. That will be followed by a presentation by myself, talking about how we can reduce barriers to rooftop solar and from a public policy perspective. And finally, Amanda Shepard, our Senior Manager of Outreach, will talk about how to communicate with your lawmakers. But because ultimately, if we want to make solar more accessible and affordable, we need better public policy in the state of Indiana. So with that, I will be happy to turn this over to Chris Rohali with Green Alternatives.
Thanks, Jesse. Let me go ahead and get my screen up. Great to be with you here today. Thank you for inviting me. How are we there?
Looking great, Chris.
Okay, so yeah, Jesse really has told you what I plan to talk to you about today. And first, just let me tell you a minute about myself. I'm president and co-founder of GAI, Green Alternatives. We've been in business since 2008. We started in Kokomo, and we just this year opened a new location in Flora. A big splash to be just completely kind of upended by what 2020 has become. So I grew up a Cubs fan. I'm all about next year and always have been. But anyway, we're happy to be in both locations. As Jesse said, today we're going to talk to you about technology, project development, financing options, and incentives for solar. From a technology standpoint, let's let's think a little bit differently about technology. A lot of times people talk about the actual hardware, and I'm going to encourage people to start thinking about solar more as a system. Especially if you're going to be a discriminating consumer, think about it as a whole, the pieces as a whole. In the simplest form, early on, solar was off-grid. I mean, that's all there was. The inverters that were available to us back 20 years ago looked electrically a lot like a generator. And so it could not exist with the grid. Hopefully my very good art skills are making that kind of clear. So no grid input. It basically had some extra hardware so that you could store your own energy in batteries. I mean, wires through your house always go, it's pretty consistent. Through a breaker box, all your wires are protected, and the inverter became the source of that in an off-grid scenario instead of your utility. Basic grid-tied systems came up in the early 2000s and kind of revolutionized. You can see that half of the colored blocks on this page disappeared. So very cost effective by comparison. And then as that really started the long slide in price, the volume curve is really what brings technology costs down. So with a little more affordability with grid tied, more people were interested. With policies that made the grid tied even more attractive to homeowners, even more people invested, and then it became a self-feeding cycle. This is by far the most common architecture of an installation today, especially residentially. But coming back now is a hybrid system, and this has been around for a while, but we'll talk a little more about that. So basically, it is a system with the same storage element as an off-grid, but there is a utility feed, and the two can work in harmony. The battery inverter can still feed the house, but it can also push to grid in the those times of day or year when you are generating more energy than you are using at the very same moment. So what you'll see here, typically in the backup inverter, is that we pull some circuits out. We generally don't do that for a whole house, or at least historically have not. And so the loads that you want to continue running if you lose the utility go to their own little breaker box. So, but now you see I've circled this backup inverter a little bit. That's where we're going to focus some time. So again, when you think technology, the first question you ought to ask yourself is, am I thinking off-grid, grid-tied, or a hybrid? Okay. That inverter, the hybrid inverter, has seen just a rush of very sophisticated product introductions in the last 12 to 18 months. You've got players like Generac, SolarEdge, Tesla, Outback, which is an old off-grid name, and Sonnen, to name a few. And even their new product introductions in the last 3 months have just really been exciting. There's a lot more to come, and that's a topic of a whole separate call. So I'm just going to tell you that this is the motivation behind my focusing your technology thoughts on overall architecture. So what these systems now make possible, backup power is very useful if you're out in the county, maybe at the end of a utility line, and frequently your power goes out and stays out. But most of us don't use backup power except for in storm season. It's very comforting, but it's a big investment to be very comforting. So now all kinds of functionality, like a mode called self-consumption, where if, especially in utility service territories that don't offer net metering, any energy that you overproduce and push to grid is much less valuable than the energy that you use. So putting it in the batteries, which are there already, so that you can use it later and prioritize your own energy over purchased energy. That is now possible with the control modes in these inverters. SolarEdge has integrated EV charging directly into the inverter. So you can just basically plug your charger directly to a couple of lugs on their, and there's no house rewiring required now to add that if you have this system already installed. And they can switch the current priorities. So again, if you don't want to push to grid, you charge your batteries first, you meet your local demand second, and if you've got full batteries and you're not using it, it will instead try to store it in your car instead of pushing to grid. So just, and add to that, there are home management features. You know, the inverters, if you give them a Wi-Fi presence or an internet presence, can actually go out and look at 3-day forecasts and determine that, oh, if there is a storm front coming, perhaps we should be a little less aggressive on the backup power or the self-consumption, and save as much as we can to be ready for a backup power scenario. It just truly the amount of intelligence there right now, and that they have announced to be introduced over the next 6 to 12 months, it's remarkable compared to what we've seen the 10 years previous. So let me summarize the technology bit here. I want you to know that you should include the architecture and the technology considerations as well as your components. That there are changes happening fast. Things that I tell you today might already be a little stale by the time you're entertaining a system at your own property. And the inverters are becoming more and more sophisticated and have to be considered the heart of the system, where the panels, the solar panels, the PV modules used to be what everyone asked about. It's what everyone sees. It's probably still what you think about first. They are more and more becoming commodities. So the system performance now and differentiation follow the inverter and not your modules. It's not that the modules aren't important, they are. It's just that the level of quality and uniformity is pretty stable across most manufacturers. So the last bullet here, the market is adapting to a changing policy landscape. So we talked about the net metering. You're going to hear more about that a lot later. A lot of these developments were kickstarted when net metering started going away in other states. So that's capitalism at work. So I won't spend much time on that. Let's talk about project development, because this is sometimes where you get surprised. The sales process is kind of nice. That's the first step in project development. After that come permitting, utility interconnection, and construction. So in the sales process, that's actually the most exciting time. But here's what a lot of people maybe underemphasize, which is research the technology and the market on your own. Try to do a lot of reading. Come to events, participate in events like this. Try to be as informed as possible. When you do that, then take a look at your last year of bills, your last 12 bills. What you'll want is an annual average consumption, or at least an idea, in kilowatt hours. So often the aspect of our bill that we are familiar with and what really means a lot to us is how many dollars it is. But when you're considering solar or generating your own energy, the number of kilowatt hours, the amount of energy that is your target, is really where you need to draw your focus. So once you know the scale of your consumption on an annual basis, then you need to decide on your technology, and you need to decide where it's going to be and how much of it there's going to be. I'll talk about that in a minute. Then, of course, you get the comparative quotes. And I have this bullet first: don't be pressured into signing a contract. We're seeing, as the technology becomes more and more affordable, that there are more and more companies with sales models that I feel strongly do not serve the customer. And those companies, Indiana has never been a real fertile ground for residential solar just because of our kind of weak policies. We don't have any state level incentives, but the economics are close enough now that we're starting to see bigger companies come in. They have very high pressure sales tactics. It's not that their hardware is bad. It's not that they don't understand it, but there are very high pressure techniques that may cause you to commit to something that you regret later. Know what you're paying for your system. When you get quotes, that's one thing that it will allow you to do, is to compare on some kind of a level playing field the options you have, and then understand the differences between those numbers. Don't let anyone focus on a monthly payment for your system or on no money down financing. And the third is, don't buy a system that is too large. And I can talk about that in a minute too. The last thing so the system that's too large hinges on your last 12 months of energy bills, right? So you want a system that's sized appropriately to your consumption. You'll also see some claims on how much energy one system makes over another. And maybe they will compare because they've got the best panels. But again, as we said, the panels are kind of no longer the driver here. And so it pays you big time to do some background homework and trust but verify on things like energy production and what an appropriate size is. And I've left you a couple sources here where you can go yourself. One is PV Watts. If you've got a little geek streak, you can go to PV Watts and you can build your own sample system. I mean, you give them your zip code, and this is a Department of Energy site, the National Renewable Energy Lab. Very impartial. They can give you exactly the production resource that is available to you on an annual basis, and tell you what a system of a certain size will generate. So you can play with that. The other is sirensolar.org. Jesse, if it's okay to put in a plug for them. They are a great group of advocates at the Solarize and Solar Uniting Neighbors, and there's a lot of independent or mostly independent organizations that you can go to for good question and answers, people who aren't going to directly benefit from the answer they give you. So I strongly encourage that. So if we talk about siting, we definitely want your system, at least the collector part of it, to be in the sun. So, and we want it to be in the sun all year. It's most important to be in the sun in the summer, and it's most important to be in the sun during the peak solar window, like from solar 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So if you have some shade in the winter, or if you have some shade in the late afternoon, I don't completely discourage you from considering it. Just be aware that there would be some production loss. You should consider ground versus roof. There are strong advantages to both. We always prefer ground if possible, just because the panels will last long enough that at some point, most of our roofs will need to be replaced before our panels need to be replaced. So it's a pay me now or pay me later, and we're usually very comfortable postponing that expense. But yeah, it also lets you maintain these, especially now if we go back into a backup scenario. If you've got batteries there, you want to keep these clean all winter, keep the ice off, and all summer. I mean, Indiana is very agricultural. We have very high particulate levels that settle on that glass and reduce efficiency. So that's our preference. But that being said, we do a lot of roof work because it's more practical in a lot of cases. Here, when we talk about system sizing, this is a very good graph, and this is kind of a residential usage profile. If blue here is the power you use, you see a very typical peak in the morning when everyone is finally waking up. You turn on the coffee machine, the toaster, or the shower, the lights, the hairdryer, and then when everyone leaves, when that's a thing again, to go to school or work, or things just you don't use as much. And when the end of the day, near the dinner hour and evening hours roll up, that's when peak consumption typically occurs in residential applications. Peak solar production happens while you're gone. And if you have a nice sunny day, you'll get a perfect sine wave like this. Only shadows of obstructions or clouds will change this. So this area here is probably something you have to do with. You either have to store it in batteries or push it to grid. So the size, if you don't want to push so much to grid, you might want to reduce the system size you're considering. If you make it too large and you go with a grid-tied system, then the excess benefit that you push does not go to you. You're spending money on a system that you'll never get credits back necessarily. So try to share. I know your parents taught us, our parents all taught us to share when we were little, but this is not, it's put some bounds of reason on that. You don't necessarily need to share that with your utility. This is the same concept for businesses as well. It's just this profile is different, and businesses can maybe more accurately scale a system to their consumption because they're active during the day, during the peak solar production times. So next step would be permitting. We're in Indiana. Every local jurisdiction has their own rules, so try to be familiar with them. Usually you'll have an electrical permit, sometimes a building permit. If it's a roof mount, you may be required to provide stamped engineering drawings. Anytime you see a line item here, account on another expense to go with it. For a ground mount, some areas in Indiana require a land use permit. This is not an expense, but be aware it could ruin your plans. Setback requirements will keep a ground mount system anyway, possibly away from what you consider an ideal location. And as always, if you've got a permit required, you may require an inspection at the end of the project before they will allow the system to be turned on. For residential, if you're in a subdivision with a homeowners association, your covenants may complicate your decisions. So definitely check on your covenants, maybe even before you enter the first part of the sales inquiry process. Now, a lot of times an installer can help deal with your HOA, but we've seen several that are pretty inflexible. I'm sure that you've seen stories of them online as well. But in several cases, though, we've managed to get an exception, pardon me, that allowed the solar. Let's go forward then, please. There. The last things, and these are the bigger surprises. There's an application that has to be submitted to the utility that you will need to provide your installer a recent bill, because we need the exact account number, name, and address as shown in your utility records. And the utilities require us to submit a proof of insurance. That's a liability insurance, and it's usually just denoted on the front page of your homeowner's policy. The technical stuff your installer will take care of, and that whole package is submitted to the utility. If your system is greater than 10 kilowatts at the inverter, that's AC power, those systems are considered level 2, and utility engineering will have to review them. There's a small fee for that is proportional to the system size, and it takes another couple weeks typically. Then at the end of that approval, there will be a contract generated for you to sign between you and the utility. That's not your installer, but the utility won't let you proceed without your signing the new agreement. That has to do with the power that you will push. Construction, the duration will depend on size and complexity. We've done a small residential system in a long day. Typically, a residential system will be less than a week. We did a system in Ancilla College that took 4 months. So again, that's not a typical homeowner system, but understand that there's complexity not only in the installation, but in tying that installation into your existing electrical infrastructure. And that is unique in every case. So it's hard to give one single number. After construction comes the inspection, and then the paperwork required for the utility to change their meter. Only once they change to a bidirectional meter do you have formal permission to operate your system. So that's, it's pretty frustrating for people. Inspections we've found generally happen pretty quickly. The utility stuff can drag out pretty long. And after you have your system up, it's pretty frustrating to watch it not do anything for you until they change your meter. So just be aware that's a surprise for you. Financing is getting bigger and bigger, and then I'll not be too long after this, Jesse. Cash purchases will always provide the best return on your investment because finance charges eat away at your energy savings. However, these are not small things, and cash purchases are not always possible. So when you have to have financing, you've got a few choices. Bank loans, typically home equity loans, are probably the most accessible. There's an outfit called the Clean Energy Credit Union that is that does something similar, but it's a loan structured specifically to the solar life cycle and solar economic life. And then there are solar specific loan companies that actually it's a fascinating product. And what they do is this is a lot of the basis of the no money down advertisements. It's finance companies that do this. So you sign with them and get typically a 30 to 60 day period where you don't make a payment. Then you start making monthly payments. And what's very important to notice about most of these is that somewhere in the future, they will recalculate your payment. And they assume, setting this payment, that when you receive your tax credit, you're going to cut them a check for the full amount of the tax credit and pay down your system. If that happens, your system stays, or your monthly payment stays exactly as it was the first several months. If you don't do that, or if you pay less than the full tax credit amount, your monthly payment will go up. It's kind of like an adjustable rate mortgage kind of thing. Or you can overpay and pay some of that down and lower your payment. But it's very important. What we see with the high pressure salespeople is a lot of them offer this and they focus on the no money down. The other thing they do is they focus on your payment, and they will extract from you what your utility payments are and try to make sure that this payment is set in a way that it is just slightly lower than your utility payments. And some of them actually mask what you will pay for your system. So they're not necessarily giving you your best value. They're giving you savings, which is important, and it improves your cash flow right away, which is great. But you may be leaving money on the table for the privilege. So just buyer beware. Incentives, we don't have much, and I think there's going to be a lot more detail coming, but incentives differ. You're a lot better off if you're a business than if you're a residence or a not-for-profit. So I think Leah is going to get into that a lot more. This has really nothing to do with what we were saying, but it's just such an awesome slide. This is a map showing solar installations as tracked by Siren Solar. 2011, when we were just really starting to see a ramp up. This was 2017, back before the net metering changes. And this was this year. I just grabbed it off the website last week. This is not a flash in the pan. So it's encouraging to watch the progress. And sometimes you have to step up and look at it like this to actually see how much of it is happening. So that's all I've got right now. And Jesse, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris, for giving us such a great overview of the technology and project development and financing considerations for going solar. Now we're going to be hearing from Leah Thill, who is the Senior Environmental Planner for the Michiana Area Council of Governments. Yep.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Jesse, I need permission to share my screen.
Okay, we will take care of that. Okay, you should be able to do so now.
Great. Can you see?
Yes.
All right. How's my audio quality?
Yes, it's good.
Great. I'm going to talk a little bit more about state and federal incentives. As Jesse mentioned, I'm with the Michiana Area Council of Governments. We're a regional planning organization in northern Indiana. We cover St. Joseph, Elkhart, Marshall, and Kosciuszko counties. And just if you're not familiar with us, our main program areas are transportation and transit, community development, and the piece that I work on is mostly sustainability. And the reason that we are in the solar energy space is that we've helped with several clean energy programs. The first is that we assisted 7 local governments in earning their Department of Energy Soul Smart designation that recognized them for being solar friendly and solar ready. So this is just a reference if you're interested in that. The second is that we helped coordinate a local Solarize campaign, which resulted in over 100 new solar homes. And so we learned a lot about solar energy through that process and how important it is to understand incentives and timelines for when those end so that people can take advantage of them while they're still around. So I'm going to go into detail now a little bit more about net metering to explain that and explain why it's important. So first, net metering has been around for about 15 years in Indiana, and it was expanded about 10 years ago. But it's now being phased out due to a 2017 law that was known as SB 309 or Senate Enrolled Act 309. And Jesse may be talking more about that later on. But here's what net metering is. It's a credit system where it's a one-for-one exchange of kilowatt hours of electricity so that you're only billed for the net amount of the kilowatt hours that you use. So it's there's the phrase, the meter running backwards. So all kilowatt hours have the same value. You subtract what you send to the grid and what you use at the end of the month, and that's what you pay for it. If you send back more than you use that month, that rolls over as a credit. You get to bank that for future months. Everything else is called net billing. Anytime there's a different value applied to what you send back to the grid, that scheme is called net billing. So it's a different value than retail rate. Some municipal utilities have net billing, some rural utilities have net billing. So the important note is that this state policy only affected investor-owned utilities. So that would be around here, NIPSCO, Indiana Michigan Power, some parts of Duke territory come up here. So that's who this change in policy is affecting and the phase-out timeline is affecting. So the others are business as usual because municipal utilities and REMCs, they have different governing structures and are not regulated in the same way. So after July 1st, 2022, new systems will have a net billing system where they are going to be compensated at wholesale times 1.25 or wholesale plus 25% for those systems in investor-owned utility territory. And that's when net metering will officially be over. Systems installed between now and the day that it ends, if you install before July 1st, 2022, then you continue to receive the benefits of net metering for 10 years, so until 2032. So that's a really key point to understand here. But a little bit more about why it matters. So I'm going to go back to Chris's great illustration. It matters because where you see the blue area and the yellow area, wherever the yellow area is not overlapping the blue, that is where the electricity is being sent back to the grid. And wherever the blue is not being overlapped by the yellow, that's where you're pulling power from the grid So net metering allows you to transfer, as if it has the same value, the electricity that you use during the day to the night, and it's as if the utility grid distribution system is your battery. So that's why it's important on a day-to-night basis. And batteries can help smooth that out if you don't have net metering. However, when we look at the month-to-month situation, batteries aren't really practical for storing up energy in the summer and using that in the winter, but net metering is really critical for that. So you can see anything above the blue line is where production exceeded the energy usage. And so those kilowatt hours can just directly be banked up and used in the months where there's less sun due to shorter days, et cetera. So that's why it's important to be able to use those credits from the day at night and to be able to use the credits from the summer in the winter if you're trying to cover all of your electricity year round, for example, and just to get the most value out of that. So that's why it's important. Wanted to go into a little more detail on that. Also wanted to share this graphic on the phase out timeline. So starting back in 2017, this is what was put in place. So there was a rush in 2017 to install before the beginning of 2018 so that people could get 30 years of net metering and be grandparented into that. And now we're just most of the way through this long, slow phase out period of a few years. So this is based on the date the system's installed. So we are here in just the beginning of 2021, probably practically by the time anyone started working on a project, that's when it would be placed in service. So here until this red point, you get net metering for 10 years, and afterwards, this is another drop-off point. So this, getting it installed on or before June 30th, 2022 is very critical. This also shows the years of net metering that you receive based on when it's installed. And you can see that the typical payback period, it depends on incentives, it depends on the electricity rate that you're paying, but it could be anywhere from 8 or 9 years to 15 years. And so you can see in many cases, the remaining years of net metering still matches up nicely with what your payback period would be, justifying going solar. So that's a decision that would be made on a case-by-case basis for every project, if maximizing those financial benefits is the greatest concern. But other folks have other concerns. For example, my parents installed solar about 5 years ago, and they have a rural utility, and they are only compensated at wholesale rate, but they still decided it was important to them to put up solar panels. All right, so I want to talk about another state policy, and that's the property tax exemption. So the property owner gets an exemption on the added assessed value that the system would add to the property. So it's not a deduction from your current assessed value. It is complicated, so I would just say contact your local assessor's or auditor's office, and they'll direct you to the form to fill out. It's a little convoluted because in some cases, you have to fill out the form in order to add the assessed value, and then have that deducted back off of what you owe. So it's kind of a wash to do that. But I think the good thing to keep in mind is that the positive here is that we can avoid a situation where individual assessors start adding in the value of solar to your property and then taxing you on that. And that happened in Michigan. There was a famous case in Ann Arbor where communities a few miles apart were treating solar systems very differently. Some were being taxed and some weren't, until Michigan clarified that through a state policy exempting solar systems. So Indiana was ahead of the game in that and has exempted these systems from property tax payments. So whether or not you fill out that form to get the assessed value added to your home, if that matters to you, maybe you want to use that to try to sell your property at some point and you want your assessed value to look higher, even though that's unrelated to your appraisal. But yeah, I think the positive is just that there's some protection here from arbitrarily some counties assessing that and taxing that value. The exemption to note here is that this does not apply to large utility projects or projects where they are the retailers of electricity. So it doesn't generally exempt large-scale projects from that payment, which can be a pretty significant local economic development benefit to communities where those large projects are proposed to be located. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to talk about here is the federal incentive, the investment tax credit, as Chris gave a brief overview. So that's available currently for both the residential and commercial side. It's really important to understand that the residential investment tax credit will no longer be available after 2021. So you must install your project in 2021 in order to file and get that credit in 2022. So it goes down to 0%, it's gone. The commercial credit right now is slated to be around at 10% and not expire. So that's critical to understand the difference there. It's also important to understand that it's not a refundable credit, so you have to owe that amount of federal taxes in order to receive that benefit. Otherwise, it just kind of rolls to the next year. So if you're retired or maybe this year didn't have a lot of income and you're installing a solar system with some savings or something, you may not get that full benefit if you don't owe that amount in federal taxes. But I would recommend going to the website dsirusa.org and check out more descriptions of incentives. You can search by Indiana, and they'll give a more complete explanation of these items and the forms to fill out and that kind of thing. But if you have any specific questions, I've helped a lot of folks navigate this process, and I'd be happy to help. All right, so there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. MACOG has a solar energy page where we have a list of installers and just some other information as well. I did not go over accelerated depreciation, which is something that businesses can take advantage of. That's not something that I'm an expert in, so I would just defer you to your tax accountant for more information on that. But that is definitely something that helps bring down that payback period for commercial projects. And then I noted that Chris had the USDA REAP grant program on there just as another incentive. That is a federal grant program, Rural Energy for America program. And that can be quite competitive, but for agricultural producers and farmers, that can be a pretty attractive extra funding, even though often projects get built and you may not find out if you were awarded the grant, just because the application process, sometimes funding is not available when you're building your project. But definitely look into that if you are an agricultural producer of any kind and see if you're eligible. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jesse. Thanks.
Really appreciate it, Leah, for really focusing in on net metering, which is the central public policy to think about if you're going to go solar. And now we're going to switch over to me, and I will be talking about public policy. All right, so I'll be talking about how do we make rooftop solar more affordable and accessible in Indiana, really building off of Chris and Leah's presentations. So why does public policy matter? One is that it can strengthen the job situation in Indiana. And number two, as I said, we can make solar more accessible and affordable. Just a quick note on those jobs. It turns out that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the fastest growing profession for the next several years is none other than solar installations, people who are involved in solar installations. The problem is that Indiana doesn't even rank in the top 10 in terms of solar energy jobs, nor for that matter, in the top 10 for energy efficiency jobs. And that is very much tied to the fact that while there are so many aspects that make Indiana an attractive place to be investing in, we don't have really strong public policies compared to our Midwestern competitors. So now let's talk about how do we make solar more accessible and affordable. Leah talked about the federal solar tax credit, and I just want to simply impress upon our listeners here to really think about installing a solar system in 2021 if you're going to be installing a residential system, because you get the advantage of both the federal solar tax credit as well as net metering being still in place throughout 2021. Of course, we talked about a net metering here, so I'm not going to reiterate that, but simply really just underscore that once again, this is going to be phasing out in the middle of 2022, unless there's a change in public policy. And so it's a really prime opportunity. Next year's a really prime opportunity to consider going solar. I also want to mention the concept of solar co-ops. This isn't public policy, but it definitely gets to the issue of incentives in the sense that the concept of a solar co-op, which is being developed by our great partner, Solar United Neighbors, is that a bunch of prospective solar owners come together virtually, obviously in the midst of the pandemic, and trade information about their own deliberations about whether to go solar. And they also basically leverage their collective buying power, whereby if they join in these co-ops, which are free, they can then essentially issue a request for a proposal to several different solar installers, get back a bid. Everyone pays that same amount based on the response to the bid. And normally those solar installers will give a discount because they get the benefit of serving a number of different individual solar owners, prospective solar owners who are again wanting to go solar. So there are 4 different co-ops in Indiana, 3 in central Indiana in Marion County, Boone County, and Hamilton County, and then a 4th that just recently started in Northwest Indiana. And our friends at Solar United Neighbors actually have a webinar coming up on Monday, December 14th at noon Central Time, and we'll post that on our Facebook page, as well as at hecweb.org/solar, which is going to be a great resource for you going forward to learn about incentives and good quality installers like Chris Rohali's company. Getting back to that point about Indiana being in the minority in terms of solar, kind of weak state solar energy policy, you see on this map the list of states that are at different levels of net metering solar policy. And most states, as you can see in the orange color, do have some net metering policy in place, and just a minority of states, including Indiana, are in the process of phasing out net metering. Now, what I want to talk to you about for the next few minutes is 3 public policy options to be familiar with that we don't have in Indiana, but that do exist in a lot of other states that we want you to be aware of, because we really hope that you will be talking to your lawmaker about these 3 particular public policies that, again, would make rooftop solar more accessible and affordable in Indiana. So here's a setup for the first public policy. Suppose you have a situation where, for technical reasons, you can't go solar. Maybe you don't have a sufficiently new rooftop. You don't have the ground space because you've got mature trees all over your properties. Maybe the issue is a financial one, which is you don't have the cash to pursue a solar project, or you don't want to take on a loan to pursue solar. Or maybe it's a legal one, as Chris mentioned in his presentation, where your homeowners association is prohibiting solar in your community. In any of those cases, there is the case for Indiana adopting public policy to legalize third-party community solar. Now, that might sound like mumbo jumbo, but what that concept is it all hinges on this notion of community solar, which is this idea that a solar installer or solar developer buys a piece of property, places a solar farm on that property, and sells shares to that solar farm, a community solar farm, to a variety of different end users. It could be homeowners, it could be business owners, it could be faith communities, etc. And they all buy shares from it. And to the extent that they're buying their power from such a community solar farm, they're getting a credit on their electricity bill from their utility company. The reason why it's called a third-party community solar program is that it isn't the utility that is sponsoring that community solar farm, it is a third party. And that third party could very well be a solar installation company. Maybe Chris Rohali down the line takes green alternatives in the direction of third-party community solar if that were to become legal in Indiana. And this has been a remarkably successful model for advancing rooftop solar and ground mounted solar in India, in America, I should say, not in Indiana, but in America. There's almost 400,000 homes that effectively are powered by community solar, and we'll have another 685,000 homes effectively powered by community solar over the next 5 years. Here's a map of all the states that have pilot community programs denoted in blue, and those that are in red have some type of supportive legislation. And once again, Indiana does not have supportive legislation related to third-party community solar. Another setup here is, again, maybe the situation is financial. You really want to go solar, you've got a good rooftop, but you don't have the cash and you don't want to take out a loan. In this case, something like third-party financing could be an attractive option for you. Again, it's not something that is allowed for in Indiana. It's public policy that we want to have in Indiana, but the concept is either one of two forms. One is called solar leasing and the other is called a solar power purchase agreement. The idea of solar leasing is that a solar company installs solar on your rooftop or on your ground. You're not paying anything out of pocket, but you pay a monthly fee to that solar company to essentially rent those solar panels that are on your property. And you get whatever electricity is generated out of those solar panels. Again, it's a flat monthly fee. The other model called the solar power purchasing agreement is that you're paying, again, the solar company sets it up on your property. You're not paying anything out of pocket, and you're paying a cost on a kilowatt hour basis for that solar electricity. So again, you're going to be paying more in the summertime when there's a lot of solar energy, electricity being generated, and less in the wintertime when, of course, the weather won't be as conducive to solar generation. So once again, we do not have third-party financing in Indiana when it comes to solar. And again, this has been a remarkably powerful way to make solar more accessible to folks across the country. In New Jersey, 83% of solar residential projects are through third-party financing. In Colorado, 95% of the non-residential projects are through third-party financing. And there's about 30 states that have some type of solar third-party financing, whether that is solar leasing or the solar power purchase agreement. And you'll note that several Midwestern states have authorized third-party financing, which is very important to raise with your lawmakers, because what we've learned about the Indiana General Assembly is that lawmakers are most attentive to wanting to know what is happening in the Midwest. Those are the reference points for folks in the legislature. The third public policy that I want to set up is, again, a situation where it might be a financial constraint. You don't have the cash, or you don't want to take out a loan, or there's a logistical issue, which is you don't know how long you'll own the property, and you're worried that you may not fully achieve the payback in the time that you own the property. Well, that's where something called PACE financing comes into play. PACE financing stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. Here's the concept. The legislature passes PACE authorizing legislation. Then a city government or county government enacts an ordinance that allows for a PACE program within that city or county. Then, with that ordinance in place, generally speaking, the city or county will issue a bond, and the entire proceeds from the bond sale are used to provide low interest loans to eligible property owners. Generally speaking, the ones who take advantage of PACE loans are small businesses and medium-sized businesses. And they use it to retrofit their properties with energy efficient equipment, or to put on things like rooftop solar. This has, again, been a remarkably successful model for accelerating rooftop solar. There have been literally 240,000 projects in America that have been funded through PACE financing. And as you can see from this map, Indiana is the only state in the upper Midwest that does not have PACE financing. In fact, even Kentucky, which I know we always want to be beating, has PACE financing legislation on the books. We do not. So here's kind of a case study of this. Orion Township in Michigan. There's a company called Powers Distributing, which is a beer distributor. They used their PACE loan to put up LED lightings across their distribution facilities and to put up a 95 kilowatt solar project. They will end up saving about $350,000 in savings over a 20-year period. One important point I want to make about PACE financing is that the loan travels with the property, not with the property owner. So once again, you don't have to worry about whether you're going to achieve the full payback in that context. So a call to action for the 2021 legislative session, which will start in early January, barring any kind of COVID-related surprises, is to talk to your state representative and your state senator to extend the life of net metering, which again, both Leah and I have spotlighted, so that net metering does not phase out in the middle of 2022, which is what would happen according to the very controversial law in the books, SB 309, which was signed into law in 2017. Other things for you to be aware of is there are definitely going to be bills filed in the Indiana General Assembly to amend SB 309 in a way that would be advantageous for schools and for municipalities. There are also efforts to potentially repeal SB 309. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, and then we will hear from Amanda Shepard to talk about speaking with your lawmaker. And we really encourage you to continue to put questions in the chat, and we will ask those just at the conclusion of Amanda's presentation.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, so I am going to talk very briefly about how to engage with your state lawmakers about these important issues that we have been discussing today. So one of the reasons we want to talk about how to engage with your state senator and state representative is because it's really key to helping make solar energy more accessible and more affordable for everyone. To get policy in place that will allow people to have that access. So there are 5 steps that I am going to cover. The first of these is to take the initial step of finding and saving your lawmaker's contact information. So if you don't already have that information saved, you can find your state senator and state representatives' contact info by going to the Indiana General Assembly's website, which is pictured here. We actually have created a bit.ly, which you can see at the bottom there, bit.ly.com/inlegis. You can type that in and it will take you to this page. And all you have to do is put in your address and click search. And once you do that, it will pop up the information, including who your state rep is, who your state senator is. It will also have the federal info if you do not have that either. And so what we would really encourage you to do is, after you have gotten all this information, is save that in your phone, in your address book, wherever it is most convenient for you to easily and quickly access that contact info. That way, when an urgent matter might come up during the legislative session, because things move quickly, if you're interested in reaching out to your lawmakers, then it's not hard for you to just pull that info up and reach out to them right then and there. The second thing that we would encourage you to do is to follow the latest in the legislative session. So you can do this by going to hecweb.org/BillWatch2021. And it will take you to this webpage here. This is where we at HEC will populate all of the bills that are going through the legislative session, where they are in the process, who you could reach out to if you are interested in getting involved and actually taking action on the different issues that we are working on. And we also try and include links, so that way you can actually read the bills directly, but then also links to contact your lawmakers directly from our website. Thirdly, we would encourage you to meet your lawmaker before the legislative session. Now we're down to basically a month before the legislative session begins. And honestly, really, we're down to less than 2 weeks before the holidays kick in. And so legislators, of course, are people too. So they're going to be incredibly busy, I am sure, not just with the holidays and family, but also with preparing for session. So we would really love it and encourage you to reach out to your lawmaker now and try and schedule a Zoom meeting with them. And the reason we encourage you to meet via Zoom is because it is a more personal meeting. Normally we would ask you to meet face-to-face in person, but obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're not encouraging any in-person meetings right now, but Zoom at least will still allow that one-to-one interaction where you can put a face to your lawmaker and they can put a face to you and really start to develop that meaningful relationship. 4, we would encourage you to focus on the relationship and not necessarily the policy outcome, particularly for this initial meeting. Get to know your lawmaker as a person. Find out what makes them tick. Know what is important to them. So that way, when it comes time for you to ask questions about a policy position that they might have, or that you want to encourage them to vote a particular way, you know what makes them tick. When you do meet with them, make sure you prepare in advance. This goes for every time that you meet with them, whether it's this initial one or in later meetings. Have some clear message points that distill your position. So, have notes right there that you can refer to. We try and include a lot of those kinds of talking points on our website, which is why we encouraged you to keep an eye on that Bill Watch page. But if you ever have questions about the important points that you should be relaying, or maybe you have some confusion about what a particular bill would do, reach out to us, let us know that, and we will happily assist you with preparing those talking points. Be assertive when you're talking with your lawmaker, but also be courteous. Again, a reminder, they are people just like everyone else, and they are going to respond much better to respect and a sense of gratitude for their time. Even if maybe you don't necessarily agree with their policy position, it definitely will serve you better if you are maintaining the course and treating them as courteously as possible. Also, send a one-page summary of information when you are done with your meeting. So have a Word document or even a PDF if you want to be a little fancier, and have that available for them so that they can refer back to it later on. Finally, when you're done with your meeting, share what you learned with us. We really want to know, have you met with your lawmaker about these energy policy issues? And if so, what did they say? What did you share with them? And what kind of feedback did they provide to you that you think would be useful for us at HEC to know? And we have a dedicated email address for that, shown right here, energy@hecweb.org. So please take advantage of that. 5th is to amplify your voice. And there are many ways to do this, but I'm going to cover a couple. One of these is to write a letter to the editor. This is a really great way for you to make a difference for solar energy, particularly if you are someone who really likes the written word. You can write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, or even maybe a larger regional newspaper. And there are some tips that we encourage you to pay attention to when you are doing this. The very first is to take time to find out what your newspaper's submission guidelines are. LTEs are typically very short, maybe around 250 words. So you need to make sure that you're sticking to that in order to have a better chance of your LTE being published. Secondly, you want to inspire others with a call to action. So you don't want to just write an LTE that basically says, this is a problem and we need to fix it. Give people a tangible way that they can help fix it. So that way they feel empowered to take action. Personalize your letter. Make sure that you're including some sort of personal bent, because stories sell, whether we're talking about policy or product. Make sure that you are including something that helps people relate to why you are so passionate about it. And then finally, share your success. Let us know if you get an LTE published. Let your friends know, let your networks know, because the more people that know about it, the more people can take action. Another way you can amplify your voice is by hosting a virtual phone bank. Again, we're not doing any in-person events right now, so we are encouraging all of you, if you are interested, to help us out by hosting these phone banks virtually. We provide all lists, and we even suggest language via phone script that you can use for how to engage with your fellow citizens. I have on here, you just have to find a location and invite friends, but your location can just be your home, and your friends can just join you via Zoom. It's a really great way to build up a sense of camaraderie with people who you know, while taking really serious and meaningful action on these issues that we care about. Finally, a couple of things. We would love it if you would help us raise awareness of the work that we are doing. There are lots of ways to communicate with us and to follow us. We are on all major social media channels. And I think Jesse has already mentioned this. We will share all of these slides with you. Those of you who have registered via the Eventbrite link, if you're watching on Facebook, make sure to send us an email with your information and we'll happily share this with you as well. We'll have all of this on YouTube as well. And so how can you make the most impact? First off, please be on the lookout for our emails. If you have registered via the Eventbrite link, then you will receive a follow-up after this workshop in the next few days. You can also join our email list by going to hecweb.org. And that will get you signed up for all of our weekly and monthly newsletters that tell you what is happening in the State House. Again, join us on social media and view our Bill Watch 2021 page frequently because we do update it very often during the legislative session. Finally, to reiterate what Jesse already noted, please urge your state representative and senator to support any bill that would extend the life of net metering because it is set to phase out in mid-2022, and we really would love to see that extended. With that, again, we're ready to help you get more comfortable in whatever ways we can, whether it's talking with your lawmakers or engaging your fellow citizens. So I urge you to reach out if you have questions or follow-up after the session is over. My contact information is right there, ashepard@hecweb.org. And with that, I will turn this back over to Jesse.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your sharing those very helpful tips about how to talk to your lawmaker. And we really appreciate everyone hanging in there through a couple of technical glitches at the onset of the workshop. And would very much encourage you to share your questions in the general chat so that we can you can take advantage of this opportunity to learn from our speakers. The first question that we have in the chat, which I'll direct to Chris, is, does the ability to store energy supplied by solar eliminate the need for an emergency home generator?
That's a great question. And like so many of these questions, it doesn't have a single answer. So it's going to be situational and largely depend on what your goals are for it. One of the things that we're seeing all of these manufacturers that I mentioned and others as well, I think, add this year is the ability for home generator and the battery system to work in tandem. And what that does is it, your generator might not be as expensive as an extra set of batteries. So maybe the generator's in standby only to recharge batteries, allowing you to have a smaller investment there. So it's it's a non-answer to the question, but by saying that there are multiple answers.
Thanks, Chris. And please turn back on your camera. We'd love to see you again. And same with Leah and Amanda. For any questions that our audience may have for them. I'll pose this next one to Leah, which is someone asked about Teresa asked about the federal tax credit, which again is going to phase out in 2022 for residential and going to drop down to 10% for commercial. Are you hearing anything about, of course, there are bills filed in Congress to extend it. Do you have any additional insights to lend there?
I don't. I know that there was an opportunity to have that happen back in 2018, I believe, when the tax reform bill, are you hearing me? Yes, okay. Back when the tax reform bill went through, and I think at the last minute, at the 11th hour, that was taken out. So I know that was a disappointment to a lot of folks there. And I think that anything's possible. I think 2021 will be filled with a lot of surprises, and anything could happen.
Definitely. All right. Well, actually, and then we had folks ask about recording, which I'll just reiterate what Amanda wrote, that we'll be sending out a e-blast in a few days with the recording uploaded to YouTube, and it will also be available at hecweb.org/solar. That would be a great resource for you to visit for recordings of all the workshops we've done, all the PowerPoints that have been shared by our various presenters over the last few months, as well as just an array of information about incentives and solar installers. So please definitely bookmark that page if you're interested in going solar, hecweb.org/solar. I want to also just again reiterate Amanda's critical point about making an effort to talk to your lawmaker. Please, it's so much easier to talk to your lawmaker now, in fact, because of the pandemic, because lawmakers are very accustomed to using Zoom now. So please just make an effort. It doesn't need to be more than 15 or 20 minutes to have that meeting with them and impress upon those calls to actions that we mentioned. Do we want to, Chris, while we wait for just final opportunities for the audience to ask any questions, Chris, do you have any quick closing thoughts, very quick thoughts, and same for you, Leah or Amanda?
Just that I think we're going to continue to see change on the technical side as well. I mean, obviously you're focusing on the policy side, and if anything that recent years has taught us is that's anybody's ball game at this point. And I'm not going to predict it, but I'd be a little better at predicting the direction of the technical breakthroughs that are coming, and it's really exciting. So keep your eyes open.
Excellent, excellent. Leah, any quick thoughts for our audience?
Yeah. I wanted to address a final question that came in asking if there's any potential, given the new federal administration, if tax credits could be reconsidered or extended. So my response to that would be that's a Congress question. That's how that decision would be made. That's how that would be put into place. And so I think we don't even know the balance of power in the Senate right now, and we won't until January. So I think, that could determine the likelihood of something being put in place. So I don't know necessarily that who the president is affects that as much as the makeup of Congress and their priorities and negotiations and compromises that will happen along the way. So that's what I would say to that. And then I guess in my closing thoughts, I would really just reiterate what Jesse said earlier about 2021 being the critical year. Just assume that policies will stay the same. A lot of it matters. A lot of it is state policy, and assume that will stay the same and make your decision based on that. And in helping people learn how to go solar since 2017, I really noticed a common theme that a lot of people, they've seen the prices falling over 5-10 years, and they want to wait for those prices to fall further. And I would stress that prices have really plateaued over the last few years, and I think this is your opportunity to take advantage of the incentives that are in place. So don't think that prices will continue to fall drastically in the next couple of years. Do it now if it makes sense for you.
Thank you, Leah. We had a late-breaking question come in from Craig about why do some rural communities oppose wind and solar farms. I'll take a quick crack at that and maybe put that to Leah as well. It's varied. The majority of rural counties that we've been monitoring have been favorable to wind and solar, but there are a few where there are pretty fierce opposition with respect to wind and solar. It can be concerns about impacts on property values, although the research shows there's actually not any adverse harm to people who live near wind and solar farms, and we'd be happy to send the research citation for that. With respect to solar farms, there are concerns about stormwater impacts, but the solution to that, which Hoosier Environmental Council has been stepping up or advocacy of, is to have pollinator-friendly solar farms that have deep-rooted grasses that can retain that soil and water. Those are some of the things that come top of mind. Leah, would you like to add anything to that one?
I would add that on MACOG's solar energy webpage, we published a technical guide to pollinator-friendly solar just as a launching point for who to reach out to, how do I learn about seed mixes, if you're a solar developer, or even if you're a landowner considering leasing your property for a solar project, how do you advocate or ask for pollinator-friendly solar to be included in the project? I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Conservation folks like Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, they get really excited about pollinator-friendly solar because, farmers are really, with taking out, they're called edge rows, the fence rows, that's what I mean. When the fence rows are taken out to expand yield, we really lost a lot of habitat for pollinators and, other species. And so it's a tremendous opportunity to fit in conservation within other planned uses for generating energy and just another revenue stream for farmers. So I think pollinator-friendly solar will really take the conversation in a different direction with the benefits for agriculture itself.
Great. Appreciate your sharing that resource, Leah. We had another question come about SB 309. There wasn't much turnover in Indiana. Have any politicians who voted in favor of SB 309 have a change of heart, or has anyone gone public and on the record to repeal, revise it? The second part of that question is easier to answer, which is that there will definitely be a bill filed in the Indiana Senate to repeal SB 309, and there will definitely be bills in the House and the Senate to revise it. With respect to the first issue of regrets, I bet that there are. Offhand, I can't think of anyone, but we have a tracking spreadsheet where we've recorded everyone in terms of how they voted and not. And I can say with firmness, with clarity, that we have definitely seen those who voted against SB 309 speak very favorably of 309, which suggests to who've spoken very favorably of rooftop solar, which suggests to us that they may be willing to support a revision at the least to 309. We had a question from Rachel come, will there be education on the influence of corporate money on our legislators and their vote? That's a great question, Rachel. Actually, I'm glad you raised it in that we're always soliciting for kind of future webinar topics. And we definitely have heard from our supporters interest in learning more about campaign finance as a way to deal with just the undue influence of special interests. There's actually a cap in state law on corporate monies and labor union monies, but there is no cap on individual contributions, and that's the real problem. There's no cap in the House for people who run for the state House, for the state representative position or the state Senate position. There's no cap on individual contributions there. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll just give one more minute for any final questions. While we wait, give that minute. Amanda, do you have any quick closing thoughts that you want to share?
I'm just going to reiterate what you've already reiterated, Jesse, which is really to be in touch with your lawmaker, because that is one of the most important things you can do to influence the course of action in the State House. It doesn't take long at all to look up your legislator's info. And if you struggle with any of it, the other thing I would encourage you to do is to just always feel free to reach out to us, because that's what we're here for. That's what we love to do, is to help people stay in contact and really be good advocates for public health and the environment. So that's the only thing I want to make sure everybody takes away from my end.
Great to underscore that, Amanda. Thank you. So thanks so much to Chris Rohali from Green Alternatives, to Leah Thill from the Michiana Area Council of Governments. I'm glad I got that right, that name right. And to Amanda Shepard, our Senior Manager of Outreach, whose birthday is tomorrow. So early happy birthday wishes.
Happy birthday, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Please stay in touch with us through energy@hecweb.org, hecweb.org/solar, and please all stay safe through the continuing pandemic. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks.